All right? They do not, some ladies, it may go completely, but quite a number of ladies is significantly reduced. All right? So when someone goes dead in that regard, or physically they go dead in that regard, can it be brought to life again? And the answer is yes, it can be brought to life, all right, as we shared earlier on. But I will at this point in time make way for Pastor Mark to talk about the emotional aspect, if they can go dead emotionally also.
So why are you leaving the hard questions to me? Anyway, I think the part of the question that I will refer to, he has done a great job of answering the biological aspect of whether or not it is true. And, you know, in my own mind and in my own life, I reflected on Old Testament sexuality and I wondered about it. I noticed when David was old and sick, they had some virgins in his bed to keep him warm. And why is there so much bigamy in the Bible? And I mean, even Abraham, after Sarah, he married Keturah and had 6 more children. And, you know, Jacob and his 2 wives and his 2 concubines and so on and so on. And, you know, long ago, when they had an advertisement that was advertising mattresses, I don't know if you remember, 1 king and 21 queens? Oh, right, right, right. 1 king and 41 queens. And even when you look at the animal kingdom, you know, you have 1 cock and a lot of hens, and 1 lion and a lot of lionesses and a pride and so on. And it really had me in a kind of mental somersault with regard to the differences between male and female sexuality. And when we look at human life, and my own mother told me as a child that men are polygamous by nature. And up to now, I can't figure out why did she ever told me that, and what did she? I know what she meant, but why did she make such a statement? But nonetheless, as believers, we are committed to chastity within marriage and monogamy, because despite the examples of the Old Testament, when Jesus was challenged with the area of divorce and remarriage, he went straight back to the Garden of Eden, and he said, in the beginning, it was not so. So we have to look at the original paradigm, where is 1 man with 1 woman for life. And we have to be committed to that. And according to the Apostle Paul, we have to discipline ourselves, bring our bodies under subjection, so that when we preach to others, we ourselves don't become castaways. So I wanted to address that philosophical perspective first and foremost, because I know as men, and we go through different stages and we are faced with different temptations and so on, there could be some ideological justification for sin. And also the world provides that kind of support, and even to some extent, that expectation, where even our culture teaches us that a deputy is essential or even vital. So that being said, and I hope that I've cleared the air on that and not created more doubt and stimulated more questions, we're talking about a mature marriage where the man is still very virile, because like I talk about a 70-year-old who has a child with a 35-year-old, and they have a very active marital sex life. I don't know if his wife was 68, if it would have been the same. But you're in a mature marriage, and her libido, gone down, and you're still flying with your helicopter. What do you do? Now, the Bible says you have to deal with your wife according to knowledge. And we have to stop making assumptions. And you said it, we have to study your wife. All right? And I want you to hear, we keep the word saying wife. We don't say study your woman. Right, Pastor Jackson? We use the right language in this church, right?
Amen.
Right. Right, Pastor? That's it? Right. So you have to study your wife and understand her needs outside of sex. Because remember, she living in the ballroom and you have compartments, right? You don't care if the way is dirty. You don't care if the food burns. As long as you get in the action, you could be happy. And we could deal with the food tomorrow. Then let's go wash in the morning. So you have to create that kind of atmosphere in your marriage where your wife feels valued and where you are ministering to her emotional needs as well as the physical needs. You see, as men, we're taught just to be the providers, and we're not taught to minister to emotional needs. As a matter of fact, we minimize emotional needs. We make it feel like if it is irrelevant, but it's very relevant to them. And if you want them to be relevant to you, then you have to enter their space and make it relevant. And when you find you minister to these needs, eventually she's going to reciprocate ministering to your needs. Because I don't think we want a sexual relationship where your wife just say, lie down, and take it. For me, I want to be desired. I don't want no favors in bed. I want to be desired. And to make yourself desirable is not at this point about getting buffed. It might be too late for that for some of us. And all of that. It has to do with relationship, the quality of your relationship, companionship, intimacy outside of sexual intimacy. Intimacy is like chocolate. It comes in different shapes and sizes. There is intellectual intimacy where there is this closeness where you get in the world of ideas. There's aesthetic intimacy where you appreciate nature and the value of beauty together. There's crisis intimacy. There's communication intimacy that is very important. There's a whole host of intimacy. And as you develop intimacy with your wife, she's going to find a space. Now, if you're retired and she's working and involved in 7 ministries, sometimes she could be too busy and be distracted. So you have to be able to get these date nights and these weekends away and so on, and let it be away. If you have little children, put the children in the hands of an aunt or uncle who you have confidence in, and don't be always on the phone, a helicopter soaring over fine. This is your time. This is we time alone. And these are some of the things that you need to do to re-stimulate that. And then there is communication. And you have to talk about this in a way that does not condemn or blame and make your wife feel guilty that you hot and she cold and something wrong with her. You don't communicate it in a way that brings blame, but you express it as a genuine desire and you want to explore the reasons. And sometimes the reasons might be you are too boring. You only have one way of doing this thing, right? And you're not interested in diversity. And because, she just gets fed up with the same old, she just lose interest. And there's always variety, spending more time on television waiting for you to fall asleep before she comes to bed. Because you want to make sure you sleep in before she comes to bed. Are you understand what I'm trying to say? Yeah. Right. So communication is very important. And then there is the issue of non-sexual contact. Massage her foot because her foot hurting and not because it's foreplay. Rub the back because the back hurting and not because it's foreplay. And one of those nights she could turn around. Hey, you there? One of those nights she will turn around. One of those nights she will be dressed in something skippy and say, massage my leg. All right. It seems like if I stimulate treasure there.
Yes, Pastor, I want to ask a question. I know it will be very important. So, men and menopause. Do men really go through menopause? Andropause or... Thank you. Yeah. Could you say something on that for me, please? Thank you. Okay. Now, there's a philosophy where as a man ages, his levels of testosterone, which is the chemical made by the man's testes, all right, that those levels can begin to wane as a man ages. And because that chemical is responsible for the man's physical structure, because it's responsible for sperm production, because it's responsible for sexual prowess and so on, and its influence on generally in terms of how a man's physical body can perform. It has been argued by some schools of thought that when a man's testosterone levels begin to fall, he can begin to experience some issues in terms of sexual ability, all right? And so that is what some describe as andropause. Now, once you figure that out, that is the case, via lab testing and so on, there are substitutes that you can give to a man to either stimulate the testosterone levels, or there are plant versions of the testosterone that you can give, which can help in terms of correcting it if the testosterone is the issue. All right, so that's what some people describe as andropause.
I think I want to ask this question. I'm asking this question on behalf of a 26-year-old young man. I think this is a fitting place to ask this question. He wants to know how is it possible for a man to be sexually aroused by his 80-year-old wife? 80-year-old wife. He's 26 years old.
A 26-year-old married to an 80-year-old woman?
No. The young man who is asking the question, he wants to know how can that be possible for a man to be sexually aroused by his 80-year-old wife?
You're looking at two elderly people.
Yes.
Oh, that's it. Okay,
Yes.
okay. Because when you put the question in the context of a 26-year-old man,
That's
I thought he married an 80-year-old woman.
That's why I said the 26-year-old is asking the question.
Yes. Okay, very good question. Now, the 26, remember, the answer to that question is easier, right? Because you're looking at the man being aroused by, an elderly man being aroused by his wife, all right? Remember, even though men age, whilst there may be performance issues, there is no issue with a number of them in terms of desire, all right? So they will have the desire, but the issue is a lot of times as men, they may not be able to fulfill the spouse using the penis and those things if those areas have already begun to wane or begun to fade in terms of their ability to perform. So a man can desire. He has the desire. But the problem that he has at those times is whether he is able to deliver on those desires. All right? And so there are a number of things that we can talk to men in terms of men who have the desire, and if their wives still have the interest also, all right, how they can fulfill that wife's needs sexually. All right? But
Beautiful.
But in terms of answering the question as to whether a man would desire, he can desire. He would. It's a man.
Could go ahead, Pastor. That's it. Yes, sir. I have a question here from a gentleman. Two questions actually. How does watching pornography affects? He said the marriage. Right? I don't know if it's that you want, but that's what he said. Affects the marriage, if
Okay.
at all. And
I think that pornography is virtual adultery. And you find yourself stimulated by what you see, and then there's unnatural comparisons in the bedroom. And worse yet, if your wife is aware of your pornographic activities, she could feel, what's the word to use, ill-equipped or unmatched to your fantasies. And sometimes it could produce fantasies that are very unrealistic, and it could cause you to have some unrealistic demands in the bedroom. And a lot of the things I understand, I don't really know because I haven't delved into it too much. In pornography, is really imitation thing, and a lot of them things are really happening. Sometimes they may happen if it's that. So that is totally not recommended at all. There are a lot of good Christian books that give guidelines about sex and sexual intercourse, and Dr. Jackson did a good job of dealing with the physical arousal and so on. And you could read those kinds of material as opposed to looking at pornography. That has a very debilitating effect on your marital life and on your sexual fantasies and imagination. So I consider it to be virtual adultery.
I would want to add to what Pastor Mark is saying, Reverend Marcus David is saying, in terms of, when you're looking at pornography on the television. I remember when I was a younger man, and they always would tell you whenever before the television show would start, particularly if it's one with lots of action and stunts, they would say, "Don't try this at home." All right? All right? So one of the things that happens, remember these are actors, all right? And a number of times they do stuff, all right? And of course they do it within a time frame with a particular purpose. And once you fill your mind with it, as Pastor shared, you can't get into a space where your expectations are not realistic. And so I know a number of people, they would use pornography to stimulate them, to get them excited about the intercourse. But the issue is it wouldn't just get you excited. The result a lot of times is it gives you an insatiable appetite, or an appetite that you cannot truly satisfy. And rather than get you to a place where you're just excited about your wife, there is the issue where you can overshoot that excitement, and so now your wife wouldn't really be able to satisfy you fully. And that is not what you would want. It's not natural according to what God's word describes.
I want to get a little biblical. You have to forgive me as a pastor. And Jesus always referred us to the Garden of Eden. When Eve was brought to Adam, Moses in his commentary, he says, "For this reason a man shall leave his father and mother and cleave to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh." Again, I want to identify that when Eve was created, Adam called her woman. Or when you talk about sexual intercourse, when you talk about becoming one flesh, he says wife. So there was a transition when woman became wife. And that is the leaving and the cleaving. To cleave is to adhere to cling to chase after. And when there is that leaving, meaning that you no longer have any other relationship that is a priority, you are constantly in pursuit of this one woman. And that is God's ideal for marriage. So for the rest of your life, you must be in pursuit of your wife. You must chase after your wife. And it helps when she remains a little chaseable. Don't always look like the pots and pans and smell like the grease and all of that. But things change with age. And because you have this fixation on the individual and not the fixation on sexual intercourse, even though the person age, you still pursue this person. But when you're looking at pornography, the fixation widens and it focuses only on sex. And I was glad that you made the point, and you pass it over as a passing comment, but it is an important comment that in these movies, they do things within a time frame. So you get the expectation that within seconds you come to a climax, and you don't have the patience because you're not dealing with the woman in your bed, you're dealing with the woman in your head. So you need to get these women out of your head and focus on the one whom you leave father and mother for, and to whom you have made a vow to cleave to chase after, to pursue. So don't get your mind caught up among these things. Now when you're reading biological books or you're reading Christian books about sex, they give you pictures like what he gave you. They don't give you pictures of naked women and so on. So there's no lusting. There is understanding and information. You understand what I'm trying to say? Pornography perverts the whole thing, and it doesn't give you an education. It causes a perversion. So if your mind is fixed on the person and not just the sex, it doesn't matter if everything goes south, because everything going south with you too. You understand what I'm trying to say? So I kind of forget what question I was answering. It was a pornography question. Right. I kind of go back to the 80-year-old 26 man as well. Yes. Aaron or Chris, one of them.
Good evening, everybody. Pastor Mark and the panel. With respect to pornography, I know the implication was there in terms of you would have spoken about Dr. Jackson would have spoken about the biological aspect, and you would have talked about more about the social. But can we touch on the spiritual implications of pornography? Because I've learned over the years, through study and etc., that the effects and the impact is catastrophic. Can we share, from a church standpoint, how it does affect and how we could avoid, or why we should avoid?
Well,
spiritual basis.
Well, I think by defining it as virtual adultery indicates that it's sinful because it stimulates lust, and lust is a illegal desire, right? As a man, you're supposed to desire your wife, and you have to direct your sexual desires towards your wife, and all your sexual fantasies should be towards your wife, and then you'll discuss how you fulfill that. So once there is that variation outside of this one woman, you're moving in the realm of sin. And then once you're moving in the realm of sin, you're giving place to the devil. You're giving a foothold to the devil. Now, I'm not going to push it too far and talk about, sex demons and all of that. I'll leave that for other people to talk about. But you could find yourself being addicted and in bondage. And you could have a sexual spirit residing in your space. You understand what I'm trying to say? So the best thing to do is to touch not, taste not, watch not. That's the best thing to do. The best thing is avoidance. The Bible says, shun the very appearance of evil and flee youthful lust. Bust it and run like Joseph, even if you leave your coat. So don't leave room. Don't leave room for it, and that's what I will say.
I think one of the problems, if I would say, is that the porn industry is a $40 billion industry, $40 billion, right? And what you think these people capitalize on is that, and the brother mentioned it a little while ago, is that sex is no more mental than it is physical. They both of them correlate with each other. And so the porn industry, they capitalize on that. They capitalize on the fact that people are stimulated by what they see, goes into their head, into their brain, into their minds. They fascinate on these things, they imagine these things, and they want to act it out. And so they capitalize on that. However, God gave us, as human beings, a mind. And He gave us the ability to imagine. And imagination plays a very, very key and vital role in sexual intimacy. All right? Of course, we have to bear in mind 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 3 to 6. All right? Being able to contain our thoughts and imaginations within the boundaries of purity and obedience to Christ. Nonetheless, we have a brain, we have a mind, we have an imagination. And we have to capitalize on that. We have a wife, and what imagination does, it allows us to explore the possibilities. Again, within the confines of what is pure and what is within the boundaries of Christ, of Christianity, right? So it allows us to explore the possibilities with my wife and vice versa, the wife with her husband. And when we do that, and it goes back to what Pastor, both of you all spoke about understanding your spouse. And communication is key as well. So when we have all of these things into play, we would have no need for pornography. We'd have no need for it. All right?
Yes, evening again, all. I just want a little clarity. Firstly, I want to thank the panel thus far. I think you all are doing a very good job, and the questions coming, and we really appreciate the answers. Reverend Jackson, the question before from Pastor Noel is exactly what I wanted to ask, and I find it wasn't clear enough. We clear on menopause, but when asked, I didn't think it was too clear on the andropause because you mentioned, and that is what some people call. Could you clarify if andropause is the term given for that period?
Right. Andropause is a term that has been bandied about, okay? It is one of those items which people have been discussing, and that is the term that in the urological presentations they use to describe that decline in the levels of testosterone as a man ages, all right? And with the decline in the level of testosterone in the body, there is also a decline in the things that testosterone controls. So you would have a decline in sperm, in terms of the number of sperm, you'd have a decline in terms of the muscular structure and tone, and you will also have a decline in terms of sexual performance and activity depending on how much of a decline and how rapid a decline you have. And so the concept of andropause is used to describe that general decline that takes place.
Okay.
However, you do have quite a number of men who do not have that rapid decline. As you would have seen when you read the Bible, you will realize some of these guys were having children way into their old age, all right? Of course, we don't know if they were eating any kind of root and so on, like yohimbine or whatever, all right? So we don't know, all right? We don't know how they were managing that situation, okay? Because the Bible didn't go into that detail. However, all right, you have a number of people who don't have this decline, as you would have heard. There's that guy who was 70 years old. He clearly didn't have the same decline as you would have in someone else.
But it is real. Andropause is real.
It is real in terms of, if you define what I just shared there,
Yes,
that general
yes.
decline
Yes.
as the andropause concept.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes, good night again. Yeah. I just wanted the panel to share a little bit more on communication, right, in marriage. And the reason why I say that, because I think communication is very, very important. You know, some time ago, like, you know, Pastor Mark, when Pastor Hazley was reading the question about the 26-year-old, you know, you saw something else, right? So, and let me give another example. Some time ago, my family and I were sitting in the living room, and at church that day, you know, we had a little fellowship after, and on that day, I can't remember what we were celebrating, but the children received some little cakes and so on. I mean, I thought children eating cake at church and so on. So I thought, well, the cake at home now was for the adults. Only until, but I thought I would confirm. I asked my son, I said, you got cake in church? He said, yes. So I went for the cake, and I started to eat the cake. And he looked at me and he started to cry. He started to cry. And I said, what? He asked, why am I eating this cake? So, and he's crying, and then his mommy asked him, she said, but you know, tell your daddy, he had cake. But then I said, yes, something for that crying. And then I turned around and I say, Rachel, I know what happened. Getting cake and eating the cake is not the same thing. He got cake, but he didn't say he ate it. So that was his cake that he got in church and he brought home. He got the cake in church. I asked him if he got cake. He got cake. But he did not eat it. He brought it home to eat it. And that caused a big problem. It caused crying. And, you know, I use that example, but so too in marriage. You know, you're discussing with your wife, right? And
what you hear and what she hears, two different things. And that causes a big problem. And I mean, if you don't take a moment, because I say it can't be crying just so. You have to think. You know, sometimes you see a wife behaving in a way, or, hey, something wrong. What is this? Lord, tell me. Lord, help me to understand what's going on here. And then I say, Rachel, I figure it out, you know. Getting cake and eating it is two different things. And that is exactly what happened. And if we don't understand that in marriage, then you're not even getting to the place to stimulate. Because they have somebody crying, somebody, they can't even reach to that next point. So I want you all to touch a little bit again on communication.
Well, we want to touch briefly, because we don't want to give a third lecture. But there are two things about communication. First, to begin, the scripture that I read in Ephesians chapter 5, where it also says you must speak the truth in love. So that gives a few principles there. One is that you must speak. Observing behavior and crying and so on, you could draw conclusions, because a lot of communication happens that are non-verbal. But the only way to clearly articulate ideas is through words. So you must speak. Don't assume and don't mind read. Don't feel like if he loved me, he would know. If he loved me, he would understand. You must speak. Secondly, when you speak, you must speak the truth. Some people have a way of camouflaging the truth with jokes and innuendos and so on. And they're not articulate and clear about the ideas. And then yet they expect you to understand. They say something is all right when it's not all right. They say something is good when it's not good, and they expect you to understand. When you speak, you must speak the truth. So you must speak the truth. But then it says, you must speak the truth with love. So you will know I always say speak your mind, but mind your speech. So you have to speak the truth. It's not plain talk, bad manners. You have to speak the truth in a way in which you perceive the person could absorb emotionally. So there has to be sensitivity and caring. It's not just giving them a piece of your mind. That's why so many people mindless, because they're always giving people a piece of their mind. So you have to speak the truth, and you have to speak it in love, knowing that we are all one body, and the objective is to edify and build up one another. Now, the flip side of speaking is listening. So James says, you must be slow to wrath, slow to speak, but quick to hear. God gave you 2 ears and only 1 mouth. So in conversation, you must seek first to understand before being understood. Listening to what the person says and what the person means. Active listening is not staying quiet and waiting for the person to finish talk to say what you want, or trying to anticipate a reply, or jumping into what the person says. You pay attention, and then when you do that, you value the other person and they feel validated, and that enhances the relationship, because you're saying that that person's views and feelings are important to you. So listening is very important, and you give non-judgmental responses. You give responses with a desire to understand better, or you may want to clarify your understanding of what the person says. So you may want to put it back in your own words to verify. And that is that kind of communication. There must be active communication with active listening. So there must be the speaking the truth, speaking in love. But there must also be the listening, where you seek first to understand before being understood. You validate the person's feelings and opinions. And everybody's feeling is valid. Don't minimize because you have a different opinion. You have to validate the other person's feelings. They have a right to feel how they feel. They have a right to think how they think, even though you may disagree. And then you disagree agreeably, and be willing to ask forgiveness if you're wrong, or to change your mind if you're so convinced. I just want to say one last thing quickly about communication, is that I want you to see communication as a staircase. And on the first step, you have what is called hallway talk. Good morning. Hi. Cannot talk, you deal with your neighbor over the fence. You just recognize their existence. A relationship that is based only on hallway talk is not going very far. Then next step is reporter talk. Reporter talk is where you just state the facts. And you just say so and so happened. Hey, we had to pay that bill. We had to do this and that and that. And that is the extent of the relationship. That relationship is not going very far either. Then you have intellectual talk. Intellectual talk is not only where you state the facts, but you share your opinions, you share your ideas, and that is taking the communication at a higher level. But even at a higher level than intellectual talk is emotional talk, where you don't only share what you think, but you share how you feel. How does this thing impact upon you? And that is a higher level of communication, and you're taking your relationship deeper and higher. When you move from reporter talk, when you move from hallway talk to reporter talk to intellectual talk to emotional talk, where you could share feelings. And sometimes it's easier to share what you think than it is to share how you feel. And then these are all steps that leads to the larger platform of open, honest communication, where you have what is called communication intimacy, where you could share everything openly, where you are in an environment where you feel safe. And feeling safe is where you wouldn't feel condemned or rejected or judged. And you can share your thoughts and your feelings and your emotions. And that is what you want to get in your marriage, that level of communication intimacy. So I think that's about as much as I would like to say now in this context about communication. I don't know if that helps you at all, Sean.
And before we move on from communication, I want to add to that as well. We have non-verbal communication as well, which is could be a very, very dangerous thing for relationship. And it really bears heavily on us to pay attention to each other. Husbands and wives, so pay attention to each other. I will share with you a little thing that I saw. I was looking at a video on YouTube at one time. It was some funniest moments in family time or something like that. And it said there was these two people. I think they were in their late 60s. They were married for 41 years. So their two children came over to spend some time with them for one of their anniversary, their 41st anniversary. So the daughter is videotaping the mother preparing dinner by the kitchen counter. So she's prepping for dinner. And she's videotaping the whole scene, and she's videotaping her father, which is the husband, and he's walking up to his wife, and he says, "Hon, what are we going to have for dinner tonight?" She didn't answer. So he asked the second time. She didn't answer. The third time he asked, she started chopping faster. When he asked the fourth time, he was looking at the camera and smiling. She said to him, she turned around. She didn't realize that the camera was on. She turned around. She said, "You fool. The same thing we've been eating for the past 21 years. Afterwards, we realized that there was a breakdown in the marriage 21 years ago, and he had no clue. Not a clue. Because she said nothing, and he wasn't paying attention. So very important. We communicate also non-verbally, and we have to pay attention to these signs. Sometimes people, they're going through things and they just don't feel like talking at the moment, and it's our duty to notice something is going on and ask a question, say something. You know? As they would say, bleed it out. You know, so I just wanted to drop that in. We'll just take one last question. Well, two. Quick, very, very brief. Very brief.
Yeah, it's so important, this session. Yeah, big line here, you know. My question as it relates to, does a woman, this is for the younger folks, I pass this. Does the woman, after having a baby, giving birth, lose sexual drive? And if yes, how long? And that is one. And I have one more question. In terms of what they ask here, what sexual act, if couples, married couple, are consensual in the act, what sex act is not allowed in the marriage? That is the two questions.
Okay, so the first one, all right, if when a lady makes a baby, if her sex drive is impacted, there's a syndrome that ladies go through, all right? And some of them, they can actually, it gets so bad that they become depressed after delivery of a baby. Not all ladies will become depressed after delivery of a baby, but some do, all right? When the baby is delivered and the hormonal, the adjustments in, in her chemistry, some of them, they can have a situation where their desire is affected. Their mood can also be affected. The period of time that goes for, it differs from one lady to the other. So to lock it into a fixed period for a lady, it can vary from one person to the other. What you will find happening is, now if the lady is breastfeeding and it takes a little longer for the estrogen cycle to kick back in, you may find that too may have an impact on it, all right? However, yes, a lady can have changes in her drive, in her sex drive, and changes in her mood when she delivers a baby, and it can get to the place of depression. So if you have a spouse and that is happening to them, what we advise you to do is to seek help fairly early so that she can be assessed to determine if she needs medical intervention. Because if it is very severe, there are treatments that you can give to stabilize the lady and push her towards reversal of that situation. So that's the physical.
Okay, Dr. Jackson delegated the second part of the question to me, even though he's quite competent to handle both. People misinterpret or misapply, as far as I'm concerned, the scripture that I read about marriage being honorable in all things and the bed is undefiled. I don't think it means that all things you do in marriage is honorable. Marriage itself is honorable. Marriage itself is to be highly esteemed. And the bed, the marital bed, must be kept undefiled from sexual immorality and adultery and impurities and so on. So I'm going to give you my personal view, and you could take it or eat it or leave it. You could eat the meat and throw away the bone. I could take some time and divulge into biblical support, because you could find out biblical support for anything. Eh? But the question was, in a consensual marital relationship, is there anything that should not be allowed? I will say anal sex. And Dr. Jackson is well qualified to tell you about the dangers biologically of anal sex. And he was talking about the, right, you know the word, right? Right, good, right. So that is really designed as a one-way street, right? Unlike the vagina, which is designed as a two-way street, right? And I'm talking about the vagina, and I'm talking about the bladder, right? Right. So I will say definitely that. I will say threesomes, having a third party in the bed, even though it might be consensual. Even though I talk about variety, I wasn't talking about that kind of variety, right? And some also wife swapping. There are some people who they're okay with exchanging spouses and things like that. Also things like what is called when a lot of people get together to have sex? Orgies, sexual orgies. I will think that too is something that should not be allowed, even though it's consensual. Huh? Well, I will say yes, but I don't know, somebody else might. But he's saying toys. A toy is a third party, he says. But I want to be a little liberal there. Some people have sexual dysfunctions and certain illnesses and so on. Like somebody who might be crippled and unable to move their pelvic region and so on. So within the marital relationship, you could find other ways of stimulating each other in a consensual way, and so on. And definitely bestiality and child pornography and all those things, I will say should not be allowed in a Christian marriage. And I also don't agree with pornography. You know, Pastor talked about people using pornography as a way of stimulating themselves. We need to be into each other. And have I covered it? Okay. Have I covered it, Chris?
Final question.
Yeah, good night. Just two questions quickly that need two quick answers. One, well, I hear in the more aged men speaking about andropause. So as a young man, and I'm speaking on probably on behalf of the other young men here, is there any way, as a young man coming up, you could avoid something like that? Because I know what happened to me. So that's one. And two, I remember some years ago I was reading an article or watching a video, I can't remember, or something like that, and it was talking about sex and in black men and sex with in black men, black American men, and it was dealing with cancer or something like that. And one of the things it was they were alluding to was that men need to ejaculate a certain amount of time, because in black men, if they don't ejaculate a certain amount of time, it could cause some cancer or something like that. Is that true? And is there something, well, is that true then? So those are the two questions.
Well, I'm familiar with that statement, you follow, that a man, if he ejaculates and so on, he releases, the release and so on of testosterone is part of prostate health and that type of thing. So that has been one of the ideas that has been articulated, yes. Hmm? Well, again, right? I would be guarded to commit it.
Noted, Dr. Jackson. He said among blacks.
Yes. Yeah, I don't know if I would be guarded to commit it at this forum, all right? Because the philosophy that was articulated from that, my exposure to that literature was more so, even though black men, there was a leaning towards that, but the physiology of it should apply really to all men.
All right, Brother Tex, last question.
When you pause aging.
Trying to get old, Kevin.
But you can exercise, physical exercise, eating healthy, rest, those things can help to slow the process. Hmm?
Good night to the panel. My voice kind of... As we all know, sex is important in marriage. 3 men will ask this question, 3 married men will ask this question, how often do you have sex with your wife? One said 4 times a week. The other fella said every day of the week. The other fella said once every 5 months. And then he started to laugh. So they asked him why he was laughing. He said, tonight is the night. The question is to our beloved Pastor Jackson. If he, the fellow who had sex once every 6 months, if he knew where a woman's G-spot is, probably it might have made a difference. So could you explain to us where exactly in the vagina is the G-spot?
Okay. Thank you, Brother Tex. All right. Tonight is the night. That's a good word. The, what Brother Texas is referencing, remember, we in the presentation earlier on, I showed you where the clitoris was, all right? And stimulation of the clitoris will result in the the female going to menopause, all right? But Brother Texas is also referencing, there's another spot. Remember I shared with you, in the vagina, there's a muscle called the pubococcygeus that's on the pelvic floor that surrounds the vagina. The pubococcygeus is loaded with pressure sensors, the muscle itself. The vaginal wall does not have it, but the pubococcygeus is there, all right? And once the penis is against the pubococcygeus and you have the contractions of the pubococcygeus on it, when it squeezes down on the penis, the woman would be stimulated also. So those are the points. So the G-spot is just inside. It depends. Sometimes it's just about 2 to 3 centimeters into the vagina, all right? And once the penis is large enough, all right? And when I say large enough or well positioned, all right, within the vagina, and the pubococcygeus, and the woman, I encourage the ladies to compress or squeeze down on the penis. Then they will bring the G-spot in connection with the penis. All right? So the G-spot, what is described as a G-spot, from a biological perspective, would be those pressure sensors in the pubococcygeus muscle just outside the vagina, all right? That will be compressing in that spot there. Are you with me? All right? So the G-spot is just about 2 to 3 centimeters inside, right where the pubococcygeus is wrapping around that vagina.
So the G stands for good, the good spot.
It's a good spot.
Very, very, very last question, Dion.
Good night. I got permission from the wife of one of the panelists to come and ask my last question, right?
What do you mean? You asked your mother for permission?
No.
Oh.
The wife of one of the panelists.
Oh.
So,
By the way, he's the only single man who come and ask a question.
right? So the question is, I have to make this statement first. No sex before marriage, correct? Right. So considering that usually the male desires to live polygamously, right? Lots of women. Just a general question, right? Marriage usually is desired by the female. They prefer to settle down and create a family, right? So marriage is a call to be faithful to one woman, your wife, right? Now, with that in mind, can a man with a higher sex drive than his wife now hold his wife to contract, right? If she is not on the same level of sexual appetite? Or, to put it in a different way, how can a marriage with a man having a higher sex drive work with a wife that has a lower sex drive? Because that will lead to frustration. And usually, outside of Christianity and inside of Christianity as well, it leads to divorce. So how then can those skills be balanced to work a relationship?
Well, I don't know who that person is, but they probably came in the end of the session. Because I think that a lot of the material we shared, especially the material that I shared, addressed that issue of how do you deal with the sexlessness in marriage. And we started talking about the difference in the sex drive between the male and the female and so on. So to really answer that is to kind of go over the whole presentation. I don't know if there's anything I left out that any one of you want to add or to reiterate.
Not really. I would just say, if you have a scenario like that, and frustration is building, all right, get help. Don't just, because again, if you are trying to deal with it at home and it's not settling, rather than let the frustration build to a point of breakage, get help. All right, and What type of help? Not just help from any and everybody. All right? Because you will receive a plethora or a large set of advice, some of which would be contrary to God's word. So my advice would be, if you have a situation where as a man, your sex drive is high, your wife's sex drive is not, and she does not want to adjust to you, all right, and you are feeling frustrated as a man, I would say get help. If your pastor is someone who is inclined to give the guidance, that's one place to go. But if your pastor indicates that he or she would prefer refer you, then you can also, that is something to go. But if it's getting to a point of frustration, rather than have your marriage break up, get help. What can happen in an instance like that? Usually it's advised that your counselor, whoever, would clearly devise some method of having you all meet each other in the middle of the road. And it would start, you would want to start with the philosophy that each one would use love, your love for each other, as the basis of the relationship. And if you genuinely love each other, you would want to try to first of all understand what's the other person's scenario.
That's right.
All right? But then you would want to work towards having both your needs met.
Right.
So you will want to get to a place where there's win-win. All right? So therefore, in some instances, both parties have to be willing to move. Both parties have to be willing to move the bar, all right, from where it is. It must not be a case where only one party is being encouraged to make all the changes and the other party is just being left to remain as they are. That's going to result in frustration, all right? So it has to start with letting love be the foundation and both parties having a mindset that we are both in this together and we must be both willing to make adjustments. And that's what I would say.
Just to summarize my summary, consideration, which is what you're talking about. You have to care about the other person's needs, where the other person is. Seek to understand your wife, seek to understand each other. Marriage is not just about fulfilling your desire, so there's consideration. Secondly, there must be communication, where you communicate your sense of inadequacy without blame, which is what we talk about, because you consider and you understand your wife on the position that she's in. And with that communication and consideration, you have some kind of, I don't want to say compromise, but collaboration. Collaboration is a better word than compromise. And then there is, third point, consultation, which is where you seek outside, and I use the term professional help. And I talked about, seeking a medical doctor. Dr. Jackson seems to be very qualified. He's a family doctor, and he's also a pastor. And then you can also seek a psychological therapist, because sometimes the problem might be up there. And I don't really know any good Christian sex therapists, so I can't really recommend any. But that is also an option as well. So there's consideration, there's communication, and then there is consultation.
Right, so, and we must not be like the ostrich and, want to hide our head in the sand. These type of things really increases the temptation for extramarital affairs. So it's something that we must deal with with urgency, all right? With that said, there is no justification for adultery. There is absolutely none. All right? I'm just saying that these things increase the temptation for extramarital affairs, so deal with it. All right? So, Brother Bob, come.
So, gentlemen, we were out this evening, we came, we heard, and I hope there is a lot of clarity in some of the questions that we had. We want to thank the panel, we want to thank Dr. Jackson for taking his time off to come and spend some time with us and clear a lot of questions. Pastor, on late notice, man of God, he did what he had to do, and we quite happy with his responses and the moderator. Hats off, gentlemen. We appreciate your coming, and we know this wouldn't be the last session of many other discussions that we may want to have, and have people qualified to do so in those particular subjects. So thank you, gentlemen, for coming out and supporting this venture, and I'm sure you all would leave enlightened, and we would be in contact with one another. Thanks again, and thanks for coming. Before we leave, though, we would like to pick up a offering. So, gentlemen, I know everybody, I know the men don't come out with all the wallets, so we just want to show a level of support for the speakers that came out, so we ask for an offering.